Are you therefore calling for anarcho-capitalism, no borders, no government, complete and absolute freedom? Okay, so do you?
So that's probably the one point that we concede and agree with the Marxist, with the Communist Manifesto on the border situation. It's probably the one point out of the book.
So who manages the borders? This is important for me to establish where you're coming from.
Yeah. So I look at it more of a system of almost sort of like the United States was formed on, with like independent states. And so small independent regions where, like, I lived in a gated community, and my gated community had a homeowners association that I paid every month, $450 a month. And they had a gate, and they had a security guard sitting there, and I had a sticker on my car, and they would allow me in and out of the gate. And I got provided all the services that they provided.
Sure.
Right. And so like that. So we pay a fee, a tax, whatever you want to call it. We pay a fee. A tax, what I would associate more with theft because it's forced, whereas a fee is something that I'm agreeing to pay for in exchange for services provided, right? So in my homeowner association, I paid the $450 a month, but I got all the services they provided. I've
got important questions here.
Yeah.
So do you believe all 52 states then should have borders that are controlled?
I mean, they do. They already do.
But that are controlled and managed.
Meaning that they actually have gates and let people in and out?
Yes.
I mean, I think each state could be, I don't know the best way. We'll find out what's the best way to do that.
Because what if Southern California opens up its border to Mexico and lets people in, and you don't have a border?
We've already let 5 million people in the U.S. this year.
Yeah, but that's the difference. What I'm saying
is, it's not hypothetical. It's real.
But like in your scenario, I'm asking your scenario, what if that state opens up its border and then people start drifting across from California into Arizona? Like, how do we stop that? Like, it's really important to establish this, because it's like, if you're saying that you should have 52 states that all manage their borders.
Well, I think it'll be much smaller than that. I think it'll break down into like a county and even a city level.
Okay, so even at the city level.
And a lot of what it has come down to is the services provided by that city. So like back, you mentioned California, for example. California has now stood up to say we are a sanctuary state. So now any illegal alien who gets smuggled in the country by a coyote or whatever, however they get here, now gets access to every single service that California provides, including driver's license, including voting, including school, including medical care, including Social Security.
This is a tangent. Going back to your, is this communism? I want to establish and understand your position. You're essentially an anarcho-capitalist, but believe in borders. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to ascribe myself to any label. You're trying to put a label on me.
Okay, but what is it if you're worried about this, what is the alternative? What do you want?
Well, I believe that capitalism is natural and emergent process that humans go through.
Yes.
And so naturally, we already talked about, we're trying to innovate. We're trying to use our scarce resources better. I used to carry one rock at a time. Then I created a wheelbarrow, and allows me to carry 10 rocks at a time. And I killed an animal. You had a fire. Hey, Peter, you got a fire. Can I cook my animal? We'll share. We'll exchange, right? So it's private property rights. It's free and voluntary exchange. It's natural emergent. Little kids in school are doing capitalism. They're trading sandwiches for chips. In North Korea, in prison, they're doing capitalism, and they're trading cigarettes for onions in the kitchen or whatever it is. And so capitalism is a natural emergent process where I have my private property and we free and voluntarily exchange those goods.
But I also believe the state is a natural emergent. Well, it's a natural monopoly.
Well, it's a monopoly. It's not natural.
But I think it is. I think you cannot stop it from happening. This is my point. Let's say when people are like, "Oh, you're a statist," it's not like I disagree with you. I think when you outline,
have you ever read Murray Rothbard's *The State*? Anatomy of the State?
A long time ago. But that's a book, right? I'm just looking at the reality of the world. We have 210 countries or 205, whatever it is. Why do we have that? I think you're always going to have structures that build. It's not that I agree with it.
No, I agree. We're always going to have structures.
Yeah. So what are the structures we're trying to get towards? Like, I think this is a natural process. And I think what we emerge with a natural process. Now, we can disagree with parts and fight against it.
No, I agree with you. So back to my homeowners association, for example, somebody has to be responsible to hire the landscaping company and make sure they get paid. Someone has to be responsible to hire the security company and make sure there's somebody there. And someone has to be. So there's always going to be an organizing function. We're always going to want to assign that to some group or person, right? But I think it'll be done on a much smaller level, more of like.
But how do you establish? I always come back to it. How do you establish the rules? What is a crime? And then how do you punish crime if you don't have a agreed set of rules? And so if you
we do have a agreed set of rules. So for example, if I go into Disney World
Yes.
I have to pay to gain admission to Disney World. I
Yes.
get access to everything that Disney World has. They have their own security. They have their set of rules.
Okay.
If I don't follow those rules at Disney World, they kick me out, right? They have their own security force, et cetera. But once I leave, those rules for Disney World don't apply me to over here, right?
What if I come onto your land and kick you off it? I come with my friends and my guns and kick you off it.
Okay, so
what is your
right.
recourse?
Okay, so back to the Anatomy of the State or Bastiat's The Law. If you read those books, which are both what, by the way, I recommend to everybody listening. Those are like 45-minute books. You should read them. So basically, what happens is the way that they're broken down in the book, and I believe, is that. And back to the Communist Manifesto, abolition of private property. We say in the Uncommunist Manifesto, the absolute preservation of private property. So it's my private property, and I should have the right to defend my private property. So I believe that the only reason why force is valid is in order to defend my private property. Mm-hmm. And if I believe that, then collectively, you and I could team together. If somebody's trying to come steal my property, you and I could work together to defend my property.
But what if I beat you and I got your property?
I mean, then so I haven't finished. So then the next step is then collectively, there is no such thing as a state. There's only individuals. But as individuals, we can collectively come together in shared interests. So for example, this is what happens. So then we have a village, and the village is teaming together to defend our private property. And then we make a kingdom and a country. And the country is supposed to defend people's private property rights.
But how does the country establish its hierarchy?
We ascribe those private property, the protection of private property, to this body, this state. But I believe that the only reason force is valid should be to defend my private property, and therefore the state should only have power to defend private property.
Okay, but how do you stop then the scope creep? Because it's not that I don't agree with you, but then you're going to have new rules. Oh, this happened, so we need another rule. Okay, how are we going to arbitrate these rules? Well, we'll have to have a court. Who gives the court authority? And this is the point. It's like, I think you can burn down and you can start again. I think you always end up the same place, but you either end up with a Western liberal democracy or you end up with a tyrannical government. We end up with warlords.
We don't always end up in the same place. And the reason why we don't always end up in the same place is because systems change, technologies change, and the way that we organize and work changes. So, for example, this system that we have today hasn't always been here for thousands of years.
No.
And it won't always be here for thousands of years. And part of what's allowed this system that we have to grow to where it is today, which is getting so big and so forth, is for one, as I said, after coming out of the Industrial Revolution, it organized everybody into cities. Mm-hmm. And when all the wealth is concentrated, it's very easy for the state to grow really big around that to protect that organization.
Yes.
But as that now is shifting back to decentralization, so instead of giant factories being built in Detroit, now we have thousands of small internet businesses that are all around the world, mm-hmm. for example, right? And so now this wealth, these businesses are starting to spread out. And so that will break down the state's concentration of power. And then ultimately we get back to the money side, which of course we'll get to, which is it's the fiat money system that allows the state to get so big to fight these endless wars and so forth. And without that, going back to like a gold standard, you would have much smaller governments, much smaller structures that wouldn't go to war with each other because they go broke and it gets disbanded. So both through technology, the way that we reorganize, and through the change of the monetary system, it'll break down to a much smaller, much more decentralized world, I believe.
Maybe.
It's emergent. It's evolutionary, right?
Uh-huh.
And so again, the conditions allowed for this government that we have today to grow, but it hasn't always been this way. And as the conditions change, the type of government that we have will change as well. Now, I agree with you. We're always going to need some type of a government or governance. Mm-hmm. So some group of people will always be elected to kind of run things. Back to the homeowners association or Disney World example, I just think on a much smaller scale.
Okay, all right. Fair.
And if we have enough time, we're going to get to where I think the world breaks down into that.
But that helps me establish where you're coming from. It's not so much your end goal; it's where the trajectory of where we're going as we swing back to decentralization. Yeah. That we're going to retest all these structures, and we may have new structures. That helps me understand it.
And I think it would be better for all the structures to be much smaller.
I agree.
And be able to compete against each other. And so that way we can find which ideas work better.
Yeah.
It gives people options of what trade-offs they're willing to make, right?
Yeah.
So you want to live in a land that celebrates transsexual children and switching? So you go over there. I want to celebrate.
That's not what I want.
I'm not saying you, but I'm saying some people want those things. I want to celebrate, eating steak and owning guns and natural marriage or whatever. And so I go over here, and then we can just see how it plays out over a decade or a century or whatever.
What about if someone wants to establish an era that agrees with slavery?
You want to talk about slavery? We still have slavery all over the world.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, what if the place next door establishes slavery as a?
So
as a
I
thing?
believe in the absolute preservation of private property, and I believe that your human body is your private property. That definitely goes against private property rights.
But our that's you, and that's in your territory. Our territory, we said slavery's fine.
Yeah. So what should we do?
Yeah.
Should we go war against them?
Should we go fuck those?
Should we go
motherfuckers up?
free the Uyghurs in China?
I mean, it's not going to happen.
Should we? You want to go to World War III to free the Uyghurs?
I don't. But at the same time, that is what's happening. And
so I think a couple things.
But the point I'm trying to get to is that I think often we can look at the negatives of the world. We can and I think as a Bitcoiner, sometimes we do that. We focus on all the fucking negativity of the, what the government does bad. Sometimes we don't focus on what's been good. Like the establishment of base human rights, the establishments of equality in certain regions. The progressives have done a lot as well. And, we've established these kind of, in large parts of the world, this set of, basic humane rules. You wouldn't get Uyghurs now in the United States, okay? That wouldn't happen, So, if we're going to break everything down, let's also recognize this. We're not just breaking down bad stuff. We might be breaking down good stuff. We might reestablish old trends that are terrible.
I think history proves otherwise. So you could say that, but I think history shows otherwise. So, for example, as the United States was formed and we found capitalism and this natural emergent order, slavery was abolished. And part of the reason why slavery was abolished, and people don't really understand this point, is that became a poor economic model. So in the South, they were still using slaves in a couple of states at the time, but they were going bankrupt. It was way too expensive to run the slaves when you could just have machines do the work. And so capitalism actually bankrupted the slavery model, and left to its own, it probably would have been gone.
Modern slavery is a thing; it exists.
But where does it? But hang on. But where does it exist? It exists in countries, third world countries mostly, that are very poor, that still require lots of manual labor. In a very wealthy capitalist society like the United States, it wouldn't make any sense.
Okay. Mark, in the UK, we've had cases where they've had people prosecuted for modern slavery, where they've discovered
child sex.
No. They found houses with immigrants where there'll be 10 people sleeping in a room and they're working the farm. So people will use slaves as they can. It does happen. Now, my point is, I don't think we go back to mass slavery. And it's the wider point. What happens in that region that does establish slavery? You need to
stop it. We have to protect private property rights, and slavery goes against private property rights. And so those elected bodies that enforce regulations and laws would obviously stop that from happening.
Okay. I think you've missed my point, is that if you break all these structures down, you might create new areas, new structures, which have got certain, different standards they want to, and it goes back to negative things.
Not if the society that we move towards is trying to preserve absolute private property rights.
If
so you should be able to do what
that.
You want. Well, but I think we should, and I think we should work to protect that.
Of course we should. Yeah. No, but you're missing the point. What if one of these zones doesn't want absolute private property rights?
Like all these zones today that don't want private property rights.
But this is my point. I'm trying to say, it's like it might not be what you think it is. This stuff might break down, and it might not be net positive. It might be. I don't know. And I think there needs to be a recognition of the fact that there has been good things that have come from centralization. There are good things, not everything. And I'm a Bitcoiner. I want a separation of money and state, but I do recognize there have been good things that have been established. One of the great things is the UK. Well, not great, perfect at the moment, but does support immigrants coming in from war zones and refugees. We house them and support them, and we try and allow them to build a life. That's a good thing. Yeah.
There's been some good and a lot of bad.